All right, so as we come together after having read the speech, we talked about how some of these pieces at the top of our rhetorical framework inform our understanding and approaching it. We also want to consider how any text works. Ultimately, the message of the text lives here in the middle between the subject, the speaker, and the audience. And so we understand the role of the audience. We also have to understand this is a commencement speech. And so ultimately, the intention is there and the context lives around it. The fact that we are at commencement, the fact that everyone is nervous, especially the students that are sitting there. This is a big day for them. So it's this mix of excitement and nerves. Think about how that, multiple 5 pages, 6 pages of jokes that open this play into it. What were some of the things that you might have found funny or humorous in that little bit? Anything stand out to you?
Yeah, when you said that he had like 4 friends from Oliver, that it was like presidents of the United States.
Okay, why was that funny to you?
Because the way he said it, that they got killed in the shootout with the last person.
Exactly. So you have that kind of setup of, hey, these are Harvard students, they want to be president, but they're killed in a motel shootout. Like the exact opposite of what you'd expect. For sure, funny joke. Any others that stood out to you?
When he said that they have been working for 4 years to earn a diploma and that he was receiving the same degree that remembering the full thing highlight.
Yeah, just, he kind of dismisses, you guys have worked so hard for this degree and they're going to give me an honorary one for really just kind of goofing around and doing nothing. Haha. It kind of takes away a little bit of that tension. It lets them realize, oh, wait, this doesn't have to be totally serious. Notice even he makes fun of the president of the university and calls him Stinky Pete. Like, do you think anybody would even think to approach the university president and call him by his first name, let alone Stinky Pete? Totally allows the audience to relax a bit. And so as we get in, notice this is down here in this organization bit, but I just wanted to talk about, hey, what do we do with those first couple of pages? This isn't something that he starts with. It might come up here with our notable figure bit. These people know Conan O'Brien because he's funny. So he knows I have to be funny. I have to approach it this way, but he's not going to start off that way. And does anything in those first 5 pages touch on his main idea or message? Not really. And so we want to notice, would it be appropriate to talk about those jokes in terms of the rhetorical choice he makes with his message to the students? Maybe, but is it going to be the whole grounds for your essay? Are you going to talk about all his jokes and deconstruct? No. So let's get to that first question. What is his main message, do you feel like, in this speech?
From my perspective, I think he's like trying to say in life, you fail sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
That both failure and success defines who you are. Like, in the sense that if you fail at someone who failed, it makes you stronger.
Yeah. So he has a bit about failure, that failure happens and that really it's your reaction to it that determines it. Did anybody walk away with a different perspective or a different way of stating it?
Disappointment brings clarity.
Disappointment brings clarity. I like that. Anybody see it differently? Even for me, one thing that stands out in the way that I would frame my approach to what is his message is that, you know what? You think you have every plan in the world, but things change. And, often it's out of your control, but when things change, it is natural. And sometimes it brings you to where you're supposed to be. Yeah.
Like he explained that many of the people through the 4 years of college, it's different as they imagine, and throughout the time, their future might have changed, but their idea of who they were going to become changed.
Absolutely. So notice, even though we came up with multiple meanings that we seem to see in the speech, are any of them wrong? No. But for each of them, are we probably going to approach writing about the rhetorical choices made by the speaker in slightly different ways? Absolutely. And so we have to start with that understanding of what's the main idea that we see present. Then we can start to look at these pieces, because notice we're still here. In talking about his main idea, we're still here in purpose. What do you want to do? We said inspiring is often the point of a commencement address, but in coming to those messages of, I want students to leave understanding these ideas, that's still purpose. We haven't talked about how he's gotten there yet. Now, if you start to look, I think the next question, what's the next question asked? Major sections of the speech. And so rather than going, hey, let's just chunk this sucker into individual lines like some of you wanted to do, to go, hey, look, here's a line, here's a line. Do you notice a progression in the speech? And we kind of said inherently there is that great division of, hey, the first 5 pages of this, 6 pages of this are nothing but jokes. Yeah, calms the students down. It gives them a chance to enjoy themselves before he gets to, hey, let's talk about the real thing here. So we notice that big division. Does he break his message up into smaller chunks? Tell me some of the chunks. We don't have to go through and outline every single one, but tell me one chunk in delivering his main idea.
There was one part he was like, no specific job or career goal defines me. Like, so I told him about himself.
Think about some of the personal anecdotes that he has and how those really form individual chunks, because he first uses his experience as a college student. And then he also later uses his most recent experience before this speech of being fired from the Tonight Show and how that set him down a path. I thought that I knew what I was doing with my life, but hey, situations changed, but it led me to where I needed to be. Notice how those chunks work separately. They're 2 different ideas. So we can't just say personal anecdotes. It's all rhetorical choice. We can focus on, what does this one do? What does this one do, as very different choices. And you notice too, they even address the topic in different ways. So being able to see those chunks is a good way that we can approach a passage to go, hey, if we have to look at choices and we have to look at meaning, how does he develop that meaning in these chunks? One thing that we missed out on by living too far down here on our rhetorical framework, being wanting to focus so heavily on a rhetorical strategy, is we weren't able to frame our essays well to show what are the big chunks in the speech. Yeah, Gandhi writes a letter, but you notice that the better essays in your samples are able to say in their paragraph chunks, what does Gandhi actually do? And they get to more meaning and then support that meaning with these small little details. And so when we look, if we're looking to say, hey, Conan O'Brien's big idea here is about failure, and that you fail, but ultimately how you react to that failure is what's most important, we could pull Conan O'Brien uses a personal anecdote about being fired from the Tonight Show to help make his point. And then we can start to develop, what does he do within that anecdote? How does he relate to these students? And we can even say he uses humor to do this and still have a really valid point. Everybody see what we're doing here and how we're breaking this down. Notice that it's the next question that talks about appeals, correct? Look at here. We're finally here to looking at specific choices that he's doing rather than the larger chunks, the larger pieces of this. And so some of us wanted to go directly here or directly here rather than spending the time to put some context behind it. So just sit with me and look and think. Ready? We got 3 major appeals, right? Ethos, pathos, logos. We got it. Which would you put humor under? Huh? Why? Okay, why would you say that humor is an appeal to emotions? I'm not challenging you. I'm not saying you're wrong. I just want you to be able to verbalize.
Um, if you use humor to explain something, it gives the audience a better understanding of it.
Okay,
Like, makes it like it can be a serious information you pass down, but with humor, makes it less serious and passive information.
so we add a more human touch to it, which makes it more emotional. Okay, notice we want to use those words because with pathos, we want to get to how is this an appeal to an emotional quality rather than anything else? Does anyone see it differently? How humor would fall, whether you would put it in logos, ethos, or pathos? Does anybody approach this differently than to say pathos? Okay, stick with me. Everybody watch Big Bang Theory? Have you ever seen it ever?
I want sometimes
Okay, but you got a reference for it? Sheldon Cooper,
genius.
genius. Where does most of his humor come from? Why do we laugh at what Sheldon does? Sometimes it might relate to science. Notice too that a lot of the humor that comes about because of Sheldon is him not understanding a situation has an emotional quality to it. He doesn't understand why people react a certain way or how things are. He sees everything logically. If you look at the way that Sheldon Cooper relates humor, you even said it, it's all about science stuff sometimes. That's an appeal to logos. How do you think? How do you reason? And in pointing out those differences, we're creating humor. And so notice, I am not at all trying to challenge you. Humor is a tough one to put in one category. You really have to look at how are they using the humor? Because you could make just as strong of a case to talk about Conan O'Brien's humor as ethos. Remember, the university chose him to speak because he is a notable figure. He is relatable, and college students know who he is and understand his humor. And so when you're looking at this, his uses of humor come from that place of authority and allow them the opportunity to feel more comfortable because he's a comedian. I'm supposed to laugh at this. If they had, I don't know, who's a really serious person that you can think of, like in society? Somebody you wouldn't laugh at intentionally. Let's go historically. Abraham Lincoln. Was he known as a humorous person? If he gets up there and starts telling jokes, is there really going to be an authoritative ideal that you're supposed to laugh at this? No, you're not. You're not going to really know what to do. It's going to be a little awkward. You're like, I'm not expecting you to do that. Huh. So notice, we could argue here. My point more is humor is flexible, and we have to think about that. But when we're looking at appeals, where would we put something like personal anecdotes? Ethos, pathos, logos. Like he uses personal anecdotes to connect to them. His stories about Harvard, his stories about being fired. Would you see those as ethos because he's been there? He's endured this, so it validates his statement? Would you see it as logos? Because you know what? Logically, it works perfectly fine. You're illustrating your example with a definite bit. Would you see it as pathos? Hey, you know what? He's telling me a story about him to get me to connect to him. Here's what's going to make that connection. So think, when I asked you about where you would put humor, for example, I wasn't challenging you as much as, hey, you have to actually express it and make the point. Notice it took you a little bit of time to get there because you started right off with just what it does rather than actually how does it function. How does it help us to see that rhetorical choice? And so are we starting to see those connections of how our commentary can help to support what we're seeing? Ultimately, do these matter? Absolutely. But what I want you to see is more your reasoning is what's going to make this more solid. If you look at those sample essays that we saw, those students have clear ideas about here's the main idea of Gandhi's letter, here's the main choices he makes in how he states things, and then here's what he does. And here's how he builds it. And so we've got to approach it a similar way. And with commencement speeches, it works well because guess what? We know what their purpose is. We know what they want us to do. Our task is then starting to go, all right, what's your message and how do you get there? So if you look at the last